So here are all the items you're going to need in order to emboss your invitations. This is the stamp. Simple enough. Puts the clear ink onto the envelope, which helps the embossing powder stick. This is the embossing powder. It comes in all sorts of different colors, gold, silver, copper, you name it. I've even got pink and black and all sorts of other options. This is your heating element tool. This is what heats up the powder to get it to stick to the page. I also use the Versamark ink pad. It's a clear ink, and I definitely suggest clear ink. Otherwise it can leave a mark on your invitation. But the clear ink, this is just a refill for that Versamark container. I also use a paintbrush because if I ever get extra embossing powder sticking to a mark I didn't intend to make, I can just wipe it clean with the paintbrush. And then the last thing on here, I always use an extra ruler. The trick to getting your invitation, your stamp centered onto the page, I don't know if you can see this very clearly, but there's a little black mark here. And what I did was use my ruler to measure halfway down the stamp and mark where the center of the stamp is. And I'll show you how to use that mark a little bit later to center that stamp. All right, we're gonna get started and I'm gonna show you how to put the return address onto the back flap of the envelope. I like using the return address on the back of the envelope. It leaves the front of your envelope clear for calligraphy or a cool stamp pattern up in the top, and it leaves it less busy looking. I always use the measurements along the top of my stamp pad. You want a surface that's not too stiff, but has a little bit of give. If you don't have one of these stamping pads, you can even put magazines or something underneath you, or just a magazine, just so that it has a little bit of give. I line up my envelope so that it's centered. So this envelope is just over 7 inches, so I go slightly over the 7 inches on one side and slightly under the 0 on the other side so that I know that 3.5 is right where I need to put my stamp. I'm going to get out my ink pad. Before every big stamping project, I use my refill, and all I do is add a little bit of ink to the pad. I use my stamp and I just kind of mix it around on there. I get the stamp nice and covered with this clear ink. You can see the sheen when you know you've got it covered. And like I said, my goal is that 3.5 inches, and I've got a black mark on this side of the stamp so that I know where the center of my stamp is. And I just lay it on there and press down. I will always send stamps to you with a handle on them. They're a lot easier to use when they've got a handle versus when they don't. All right, so now that I've got my stamp on there, it's clear, you won't be able to see it, but I am going to take this embossing powder and just cover up the area that I stamped. Then I take this powder and I clear it off onto either a clean sheet of paper or a folded up magazine or something like that so I can collect the powder. If you collect and reuse the powder and keep it clean, you can finish almost 150 to 200 invitations in one of these small containers. But I'm going to put the embossing powder back into the container and save it so that I can keep making more invitations. And then the last step, I'm going to take this paintbrush and look through. I did a pretty good job on this one, but sometimes you'll see little blobs of embossing powder that get stuck, and you want to use a really fine tip paintbrush to just knock those off and knock them loose so that you don't end up with globs of extra embossing powder on there before you heat it and seal it. The last step is taking our embossing tool and heating the embossing powder until it becomes a solid. You don't want to overheat it, otherwise it ends up looking a little bit crusty, but it just takes a little bit of heat and stay just far enough away from the paper. It can burn the paper if you're too close. So I stay about 1.5 inches, 2 inches away. And you'll see it start to work when it starts to change color. And you just work your way through the whole piece of art. And there you go. That is how you emboss your invitations.